Hello. I wanted to give you a little overview of the project guidelines. You can always feel free to ask me questions, but I thought this might be helpful for you to have this to reference anytime that you're working on it. In the course, when you click on content, and it's under MA253 resources, and then the resources tab. You want to click on Project Guidelines 2018-19. It will open either right here in D2L, or you can click the arrow and download it. Once you download it, the Word file will open, and this file has the overview of the project and the expectations. Basically, you want to start out thinking about a question that you want to try to answer. I would try to keep this simple. This is only an 8-week course, and it is not meant to span the entire 8 weeks. That being said, I don't want you to wait until the last minute to start on it. Some good ideas that come to my mind for the project would include counting candy colors or other color combinations of items that you're interested in. Also, you could do something with sports statistics. So right here on this screen you see under hypothesis testing of the means, the average height of NBA players is greater than 72 inches. That's a hypothesis being tested. You could do something with batting averages and occurrences of going to the World Series, something with free throw percentages and games won, anything along those lines. With sports statistics, it's so good because you can find secondary data that's already been collected and organized fairly well for you. You may want to do something with an observation study where you observe something without interacting with it and then track your data through that. The biggest thing to remember here is that you will not be creating a survey. You would have to get Institutional Review Board approval to survey people, and that is not possible in an 8-week course. The handout for the project guidelines goes through some examples of different ways to test the hypotheses and the means. These are not the only and absolute ways that you can test. We don't get to a lot of these tests until later in the course, chapter I think 8 and 10. What we do in chapter 2 with the frequency distributions is something that you could use for several of the ideas I gave you. The very first example in the chapter was counting M&M colors, and we created a frequency distribution off of it. That was the first example we looked at in the chapter PowerPoint. A few things to think about with your project. When you come up with your question you want to address, think about what your population is, how you're going to obtain a sample that's a random and representative sample of the population, what kind of data are you collecting and how will you collect it, and what kind of statistical analysis will you be performing on the data. And again, it says from the list above, but you can use any methods we learn in the course. If I were to do something with M&M color combinations and I wanted to test my theory that brown is the prominent color M&M in the variety of bags including plain, peanut, crispy, and mini M&Ms. My population would be those types of M&Ms. My sample would be however many bags I've chosen. I may want to go to 4 stores and buy a bag of each of those M&Ms. That would be my sample. The data I collect and how I would collect it, pretty simple. So I'm collecting color combination data, and I'm collecting it from counting the M&Ms in the bag. For something like that, I would do a frequency distribution. I would chart out the table, and I would create the bar graph or histogram to show my results. You're going to see a folder in D2L in the assignment folders called Research Question and Hypothesis. This is your first step after thinking about what kind of project you want to do. When you think about your question, so this is going to be your research question, you can formulate your hypothesis. This is due by Sunday night, July 1st at 11:59. This says midnight, but it's 11:59 that the folder closes. You can work alone or you can work with a partner. If you're working with a partner, you need to email me and let me know, and also include both of your names on everything that you submit. I would suggest that you take the time to skip ahead to Chapter 10 and go ahead and read or skim through Section 1. That section talks about what a hypothesis is and gives you good examples of them. You're going to come up with at least one alternative hypothesis and, because of that, one null hypothesis. I think of my alternative hypothesis as typically being my claim. It's what I want to prove. With my M&M example, it could be me saying brown is the prominent color in this type of M&M. My null hypothesis disputes that. It says the opposite. So typically it's saying there is no change, there is no difference, there is no impact. That's what a null typically says. So my null hypothesis would be brown is not the most prominent color in this variety of M&Ms. You may be okay with just one alternative and one null hypothesis. You may need more than one. When I did my dissertation and did a retention case study here at the college, I had 4 research questions and I had 3 hypotheses. Each hypothesis that I had to have its own statistical test, and then I had to report on each of those 4 research questions in my results. I had 3 hypotheses and 4 questions because one of my questions were qualitative. I did a survey and I just did a narrative approach at the overview. My committee chair told me qualitative studies typically do not have a hypothesis. In this course, whether you're doing a qualitative study or a quantitative study, you still need to have a hypothesis because that's a big part of the course. A lot of the testing that you can use, you're going to find in chapters 4, 7, 8, and 10. It may be necessary for you to read ahead when you get started on your project to see what kind of statistical test you'll need. Before you move on to collecting your data, make sure that I've approved your research question and hypothesis. You can feel free to submit these early, and I will look at them and give you feedback. Once you pass this point, you're going to collect your data, and then you're going to formulate your paper. Your required elements, besides what we talked about earlier, what is your population? How are you collecting your data? How did you formulate your sample? You need to look at those things that were a few pages back. But then this is the layout of your paper. This needs to be a formal paper, not a just question and answer document in Word. You need to use either APA or MLA writing style. You need to cover all of these bullet items. State your question and the reason for interest in it. Give a background. State your hypotheses. Talk about your population, your method for gathering data, how you tested it. A big thing here, state your conclusions and how you arrived at the conclusions. And discuss any difficulties or flaws that you had in your study. It's not necessarily a flaw in the work that you're doing. It's something that could come up because you think about, after collecting the data, that it might have been better to take a different approach. It might have been better if you collected a little bit more data. That's what drives statistical research. That's what makes research better, and that's what makes results more reliable, is learning about the difficulties and flaws you have and building on them. Any raw data that you gather needs to be included in an appendix section of the paper. This isn't an absolute list of what you need to talk about. You may come across other things that you want to discuss. There's no minimum or maximum length for your paper. It needs to be long enough, though, to cover all of the required information. Make sure that you run spell check, check your grammar and punctuation, and you need 5 scholarly resources. By scholarly resources, I mean things like articles on the library database, respectable websites, newspapers, magazines, not Wikipedia. One of your resources should be your book. You can feel free to have more than 5, but 5 is the minimum. Your final paper is due on the very last day of class, which is Friday, July 20th at 11:59 p.m. The remainder of this document just gives some examples of null and alternative hypotheses. Some of these may help you in thinking about your project. Your hypothesis is really just one sentence for your alternative, one for your null. These give a little bit more description in the examples than what you actually have to have for your hypotheses being listed out. If you have any questions over the project, always feel free to just let me know. You can email me or stop by and see me, text me. My home or cell number is on the home page of the course. This shouldn't be a huge project. If you use some of the time I give you in class and get started on it early, it's something that you could probably knock out in a few hours. Maybe by the time you write your paper, a 3 to 4 hour project. But do not wait until the end of the class to do that. You're going to be finishing up your required readings and chapters. You're going to have a test around midterm and a test at the final class meeting time. I would try to get this done and submitted at least a week or so before the end of the 8-week period to give you a little bit of cushion for finishing everything else up. So as always, just let me know if you have any questions.